Hello again, and thank you for joining us for this Tuesday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, we've got hazardous weather graphic, quite a area of yellow. Bristol Bay, that's a winter weather advisory for tonight into Wednesday. Same thing for the Kuskokwim and Yukon deltas. For snow and gusty winds with freezing rain, all areas there. And then up to the north, there's a winter storm warning out for St. Lawrence Island, Bering Strait coast, Shishmaref on the northern Seward Peninsula, northwest coast, Kotzebue, Kivalina on up to Cape Lisburne, Point Hope, as well as the Noatak Valley, winter storm warning there. And for Kotzebue area, Kotzebue Sound, as well as the North Slope and most of the Arctic coast under a winter storm warning, and that's for significant snow, gusty winds of 40 to 60 miles an hour, with snow and blowing snow reducing visibilities to less than a quarter mile at times, and that's out later tonight, or for tonight through tomorrow. And actually the eastern areas there begin a little later and last probably into early Thursday at least. And over the interior, winter weather advisories out for the same type of conditions, but not as severe as the warning areas there, right down in the Fairbanks area. It'd be starting from west and moving east here over the next couple of days, next 24 hours actually, pushing in quite rapidly actually later tonight and tomorrow eastward across these areas. And then down to the south, still a high wind warning out for northeast Prince William Sound, Valdez, Thompson Pass, Keystone Canyon until 9 p.m. this evening for northeast winds gusting 60 to 70 miles per hour. And also high wind warnings stay out until 9 p.m. this evening there for the southeast coast, Juneau and Douglas, and up the Klondike Highway to Skagway. Again, Glen Canal, of course, Eldred Rock, possible gusts continuing 60 to 70 miles per hour. Then should come down this evening and overnight tonight, and should see lighter winds for tomorrow in those areas. Moving on to satellite imagery. You can see the moisture flowing northward. That system, about 3/4 of an inch of rain in the last 24 hours fell at Adak, but that moved northward, stayed to the west of the Pribilof, no precipitation there, mostly moving in even west of St. Lawrence Island, although they're starting to report some mixed light precipitation there at Gamble and Savunga a little bit there, with winds gusting 40 to 55 miles per hour. And heavier clouds moving into the Chukchi Sea and spreading eastward, mid and high level clouds, central Arctic coast down into the lower Yukon River Valley. Otherwise clear, cold conditions over the eastern interior today. Arctic Village, morning low 45 degrees below zero, and they warmed up to 35 below at 3 p.m. this afternoon, with temperatures below zero much of the eastern interior, all the way down to the Alaska Range, and even some areas south of the Alaska Range to Sitna Valley into the Copper River Basin, remaining below zero, as did the Kuskokwim Valley. Milder, though, as you get down toward Kodiak, with diminishing winds there, and mostly clear skies. You can see the system there early on south of the Panhandle dropping due south just about there, and see the cold air spreading all the way down into Dixon Entrance and the Queen Charlottes, with those strong north winds keeping it quite cold, teens in the northern Panhandle, and well below freezing even down across Prince of Wales Island area. On the chart, there's that front back over the Russian Far East there, some mixed precipitation now approaching St. Lawrence Island. Temperatures near just a shade above freezing, both at Savunga and Gamble here at 3 p.m. this afternoon. Those strong southerly winds. Temperatures should still edge upward ahead of that front, so it could see some freezing rain mixed in with the snow, sleet possible, even plain rain possible, but probably be glaze-type rain if it does occur. And for the western Seward Peninsula, a little bit of light snow, and also along the western Arctic coast, but so far amounts have been not that great. The heavier precipitation staying mostly to the south and west there, like along that warm front there over the western Aleutians. Strong winds over the northern Panhandle, as I mentioned, and dry conditions, cold temperatures, south central Alaska, Copper River Basin, down into the Bristol Bay area, and even out still single numbers this afternoon along areas of the southwest coast. For tonight, look for moisture and clouds to thicken and warmer air coming in aloft, so areas that stay below freezing could see some freezing rain. That could extend all the way up to the Seward Peninsula. Areas of snow trying to push eastward there to Nulato Hills across eastern Norton Sound. Snow and blowing snow for the northwest coast, and then dry over the eastern interior and quite cold, although temperatures should be a little milder with a thickening mid and high level clouds there over the Yukon Flats and up toward the eastern Brooks Range, but still falling below zero south central Alaska tonight with mostly clear skies and light winds. And lighter winds for the North Gulf Coast, but still quite windy with that strong high there up over the northwest interiors of Canada, and strong winds all the way down to just about Dixon Entrance there, with temperatures staying well below freezing. And for tomorrow, it stays below freezing across all the southeast coast, but winds begin to lighten up. Could see a few clouds, or could be mostly clear. Otherwise, frontal system pushing into the interior brings areas of snow with it, and pretty good trough aloft there, so it looks like increasing chances of snow late in the day for south central Alaska, Cook Inlet area. Definitely seeing some snow moving to the Kuskokwim Valley and up over across much of interior Alaska. So from west to east, all the way up to the Arctic coast. Chance of rain for the Pribilos, rain and snow possible for Bristol Bay tomorrow afternoon, maybe some showers for Kodiak Island, showers for the western Aleutians as well. Then on Thursday, gradient tightens up, high pressure builds right back into the east interior of the state, actually sliding eastward throughout the day slowly, setting up by the afternoon right over the central Tanana Valley there. And again, another round snow and blowing snow, Seward Peninsula, northwest coast, western Arctic coastal areas, mixed precipitation, Yukon Delta coast, mostly snow anywhere inland, but that'll be pretty light as that high pressure holds. And chance of snow off the south coast of the Panhandle in the afternoon, but again, windier for Lynn Canal, probably looking at north winds sustained at 45 knots there, and 40 knots possibly, or at least gales for Stevens Passage as well. Warmer conditions, periods of rain, gusty south winds, mild south winds there for St. Lawrence Island, mixed precipitation approaching the Seward Peninsula, and rain all the way down to the Aleutians. Lows tonight, single numbers over the northern Panhandle. Juneau forecast low of about 8 degrees. Colder in wind-sheltered areas, but everywhere below 20. Mid-minus 20s, Copper River Basin, and 10 to 20 below for the Kuskokwim Valley, and 0 to 10 above for Bristol Bay. Anywhere from 10 below to 5 above for south central Alaska, 15 for Homer, 25 for Kodiak. Highs tomorrow near 40 for Kodiak, and lower 30s for Bristol Bay. In the teens, south central Alaska, and 7 below there for Gulkana, 15 to 25 Kuskokwim Valley, upper teens northern Panhandle to upper 20s there for Sitka to Port Alexander, mid-20s Yakutat, followed by lows not as cold now, Copper River Basin a little milder but still below zero, Susitna Valley still falling below zero but not quite as far, otherwise single numbers down into Anchorage and the Kenai Soldotna Cooper Landing area, lower 20s for Homer, near freezing for Kodiak, and the highs about 4, high of 4 for Gulkana, and upper teens, lower 20s, south central Alaska, 15 to 25 Kuskokwim Valley, upper 20s Bristol Bay, lower 40s Kodiak, in the 20s to lower 30s for the Panhandle. Up to the north again tonight, not quite as cold, overnight lows with the thickening mid and high level clouds, but still down around 30 below or so, and quite a lot milder out to the west there, 22 Tin City, 30 at Savunga, Gamble, and then highs tomorrow almost pushing to 0 over the northeast and eastern interior. Eagle might reach 3. Single numbers, Fairbanks into Tanana, but up around freezing out toward the Bering Strait. And then the lows, 10 to 15 below for the Yukon Flats to Arctic Village, and 0 to 5 below for the Tanana Valley, 15 to 25 Seward Peninsula, mid-teens for the central Arctic coast, followed by highs in the 20s along the Arctic coast, and near 0 over the northeast interior, 5 to 10 for the Tanana Valley, lower 30s Seward Peninsula, southwest coast, 15 to 25, and 40s for the Aleutians, highs 40s for the Aleutians, and mid-30s for the south.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather, IFR, pretty well entrenched out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, pushing into the Yukon Delta and western Seward Peninsula through the Bering Strait, and mostly IFR for the northwest coast, Noatak Valley, North Slope and Arctic coast. Central eastern interior, VFR, all the way down to the North Gulf Coast, and the Panhandle, Kodiak Island, some marginal VFR slipping up towards Sitkinak, and then for the afternoon, marginal VFR covers a little more Kodiak Island, but IFR pushing into the Kuskokwim Valley to the, possibly to the western Alaska Range in the afternoon, and then from King Salmon, Bristol Bay to Togiak, Yukon Kuskokwim Delta into Norton Sound, IFR there up over the North Slope, Brooks Range, Arctic coast, and along the northwest coast, and IFR mid-Tanana Valley, northeastward across the Yukon Flats. Still pretty much IFR out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians and part of the Alaska Peninsula, with VFR holding over the Panhandle and areas south and east of the Alaska Range. And for the day on Thursday, improving over the interior, some marginal VFR lingering there from the Alaska Range into the mid and upper Tanana Valley down into the Kuskokwim Valley, with some IFR there just north of the central Alaska Range and over toward North Waitok, and then some IFR eastern north slope, otherwise marginal, but still solid IFR now. Aleutians, Bering Sea, into the southwest coast, Bristol Bay there, and even into the lower Yukon River Valley. Northward to the Bering Strait comes VFR for the northwest coast, and IFR now over the northern half of the Panhandle. For the afternoon, that gives way to mostly VFR once again along the southeast coast. And the interior, mostly VFR, some scattered areas of marginal VFR, becomes a little more extensive as you head west out toward the Bering Strait coast, with IFR again, most of the Yukon Delta, part of the Kuskokwim Delta, all of Bristol Bay. And Aleutians, Bering Sea, IFR, right up along the southwest part of the Seward Peninsula through the Bering Strait to Point Hope and Cape Lisburn. But a pretty good improvement there for the North Slope and the Arctic coast. And at Tuvik tomorrow, mostly IFR, same forecast for Adigan, IFR flying conditions on either entrance. Lake Clark and Merrill, deteriorating conditions throughout the day, VFR to marginal VFR, possibly becoming IFR in the western approach. Same forecast for rainy. Best conditions early on, deteriorating slowly through the day, possibly becoming IFR in the western entrance. And windy, same trend, VFR to marginal VFR. Isabel, VFR to marginal VFR. Mentesta stays VFR, as does Tanita. Good VFR again tomorrow. Portage, VFR. And Chilcoot and White, VFR. Freezing levels, warmer air aloft out over the Bering Sea, 2,000 feet now up to just south of St. Lawrence Island, 8,000 feet north of Adak and Atka, and then 2,000 feet down across Kodiak Island. And for icing, with the moisture streaming into mostly the northern interior areas or from the Alaska Range, some will spill across, possible icing threat late in the day for Cook Inlet and the western Kenai Peninsula, and to a lesser extent down toward Kodiak. But look for isolated moderate rime icing, pretty widespread with the moisture coming in, especially up toward the Yukon River, all the way to the Arctic coast, 3,000 to 12,000 feet. And for the jet stream, Wednesday morning, high pressure building out over the Bering Sea, so northwest jet about 125 knots down across the Seward Peninsula, taking kind of a westerly turn there with an upper level trough swinging east and southeast, pushing that moisture into the interior, and then the northerly jet still blowing fairly strong across the Panhandle at 110 knots. 9,000 feet north to northwest from the Seward Peninsula into Bristol Bay and the Aleutian Range at 65 to 70 knots. West 50 knots there near the Yukon Flats. And southwest 45 into the southern Panhandle. 3,000 feet, 50 to 55 knot winds blowing around that low center, moving into the Kobuk Valley area. Otherwise, much lighter winds off to the east, northeast 45 over the southern Panhandle. And turbulence, considerable moderate turbulence over the interior areas all the way down to Kodiak Island, areas of the Aleutians, and slowly diminishing over the southern Panhandle, becoming lighter up to the north. After the break, I'll be back with a look at the marine forecasts.
Since time immemorial, that's when the polar ice used to reach us. Gulusik, the mother ice. The Gulusik was the one that set the winter, and it brought with it abundance of whales, seals, marine mammals.
I started going out in the ocean with my dad about 6 or 7 years old. We couldn't wait to go out to be with the elder men and face the ocean.
My dad taught me how to hunt and fish when I was a very young boy. He took me away out in the ocean, and he taught me how to ogre hunt. I got scared. I looked up at my dad, and he wasn't scared. So I haven't been scared ever since.
We would go out roughly 30 miles out from here, and you can hear walrus from a long way. They have very poor eyesight, they could smell you, so you always went, downwind. In the old days, there'd be hundreds on a piece of ice, I always tried to find one or two that were by themselves. They could be a pretty dangerous animal.
And I felt privileged to be out there with my dad and his brothers to be able to provide for our family and our people. But little did we know this change that was coming.
My life cycle basically begins in January. So in January, we have muskox. We also have moose. Then that time of year, the crabbing in the ocean starts.
I have fish eggs, muskox, walrus.
April and May, I'm bear hunting. End of May, the ducks come. Beginning of June, the trout start running in the river, and we'll cut 100 trout to put in sea oil. End of June, the salmon show up.
Cranberries, blueberries.
In August, we'll do 100 to 200 silvers in the smokehouse.
Salmon berries, my rhubarb.
For 9 whole months, 9 whole solid months, the whole of the Bering Sea would be completely locked up. Now we're down to 3.
The ice is coming later and leaving earlier. We probably won't have freeze up maybe till January, but it's still too unsafe to go out on the ice.
The biggest thing I've seen out of this climate change is we have an east wind. East wind is always a warm wind, 30 above, 20 above. East wind brings warm weather. We need that 20, 30 below to create the foundation for us to operate on the platform.
In the Bering Sea region, sea ice is an extension of the land. It provides a platform for whaling, for travel. It enables them to hunt and to access food in the ocean that it would be much more difficult to access otherwise.
And this is the tomcod fishing that happens. But as you can see, there's plenty. A beluga, ogre hunting, one of our elders butchering a caribou.
We've lost over 70% of the entire volume of Arctic sea ice.
Ice used to be like 8 to 10 feet thick. Nowadays, it's like 1.5 feet, 2 feet thick.
Chop a hole in the ice and, throw some salmon eggs in there, and we pull out trout and whitefish and grayling. But if it's melting a lot earlier, then that opportunity goes away.
We can't venture out on the ice even if it comes up to our island. It's not solid, so we can't risk going out on the ice.
Many communities use shortfast ice for whaling, but they also rely on the pack ice.
Even in mid-March, I'm looking for ice as far out in the ocean as I can go, and that's not normal.
At the Arctic scale, we've lost over 40% of ice extent in the summer.
2,000-pound animal, to try to pull them up on the ice with the 4 guys, it's so much easier to go after them while they're on the ice. It's getting more dangerous to go get them.
Walrus has been our most powerful ally for survival. The tusks were used for tools, hunting, harpoon heads, spear heads, arrowheads, and the skin was used for food. The female walrus skin was used for skin boats.
Half a ton of meat, blubber, and food, and that'll feed a whole village, man.
Our food resource has always been within close proximity to our villages, so that we didn't have to spend a lot of money to go fill our freezers.
What's going to be on the breakfast table tomorrow? In a week's time, will we have enough food to feed our family, to feed our community, to feed our children, our elders?
The other thing that the ice provides is a platform for sea ice algae.
When it forms in the winter, it's like a playground, and a living playground for a lot of the plankton and the zooplankton
the krill eat the algae, the fish eat the krill, the seals eat the krill, the mers eat the fish.
Without the ice, we're losing all that, and we're starting to see a lot of shorebirds and even some sea mammals start. Just this summer, I counted 20 young baby ugrux from the spring that had starved to death. Our garden is dying.
One thing about the native population is they adapt very well. You know, if the salmon go away, they replace that with something else. And if the ducks aren't coming, they'll find something else. Instead of waiting till May to go hunting, I'm hunting in April and March. I think we're facing a different kind of change that we haven't really seen before. I think, you know, if the crabs go or if the beluga whales go and we don't see them, if the seals don't come back here, how do we adapt? I don't know that we can.
My ancestors say that we've been on that island for over 10,000 years. What is very powerfully painful to me is that as we're losing our age-old way of life, literally melting away, our identity is being lost. But we're still here. We're still who we are.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Coastal water forecast time for the North Coast there. North winds 25 to 35 knots, 8 to 16 foot seas. For the South Coast, even stronger winds. Good gales 40 to 45 knots out of the north and northeast with seas around 20 feet. Northern and central inside waters all looking at gale force northerlies at 40 knots with gusts of 55 knots, slowly diminishing in the afternoon toward evening for Lynn Canal. Clear and straight, north winds 30 knots, seas 7 feet. And then for the day on Thursday, after kind of a drop-off in the winds, possibly for Wednesday night, coming back up again on Thursday, north 45 for Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, north winds 40 knots, north at 30 for Clarence Strait, and east winds 40 to 45 knots on the south coast, north coast, northeast winds 35 to 40 knots with seas running 10 to 12 feet. For Prince William Sound, variable winds at 10 knots, seas 2 feet. Variable to west winds for the North Gulf Coast, 15 to 30 knots. Barren Islands, west winds 30 knots. And for Kamishak Bay, west winds 20 knots. Small craft advisory, Southern Cook Inlet, north winds 25 knots, 6 foot seas. Light northeast breeze for Northern Cook Inlet. And for Thursday, variable winds 10 knots or less for Northern Cook Inlet, north at 15, south at Forelands, but northwesterly gales at 40 knots for Kamishak Bay, Barren Islands, north at 40 knots, 15 foot seas there. In the North Gulf Coast, north winds 30 knots, seas around 10 feet. Prince William Sound, small craft advisories for north winds at 25 knots, seas at 4 feet. Kodiak Island, west winds 25 knots for the day Wednesday. Alaska Peninsula, southwest winds at 20 knots with 5 foot seas. Bristol Bay, south winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. Moving on to Thursday. Winds become northeast, come down to 15 knots for Bristol Bay. And for the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, west-east winds at 15 knots. And the Pacific side, west winds at 15 knots. And for Kodiak Island, north to northwest winds 25 to 30 knots and gusty. For the eastern Aleutians on Wednesday, south to southeast winds 15 to 20 knots. Central Aleutians, southeast winds 20 to 25 knots. And the western Aleutians, east-southeast winds at 20 knots. And then for Thursday, for the western Aleutians, mostly west winds at 20 knots. And for the central Aleutians, southeast winds 25 knots. And for the Fox Islands, east to southeast winds 15 to 25 knots with 4 to 10 foot seas. Southwest coast on Wednesday, small craft advisory, southwest winds 25 knots. Pribilofs, south winds at 20 knots. And the St. Matthew Island area, west winds 15 knots. Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, west winds at 30 knots. And then for Thursday, Norton Sound winds coming down and becoming southerly at 20 knots. With small craft advisories for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Matthew Island, and St. Lawrence Island for 25-knot southerly winds with 7 to 9 foot seas or 6 to 9 foot seas. Kuskokwim Delta coast, southeast winds 15 knots, seas 4 feet. Pribilof, south winds at 20. For the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, southwest to southeast winds at about 15 knots, otherwise the central coast, southwest 15. And for the western Arctic coast, west-southwest 25 to 30 knots, and the Chukchi Sea, northwest winds 30 knots, seas 6 feet. For Thursday, south winds now from Wales to Cape Thompson, or Cape Beaufort actually, 30 to 35 knots. Western Arctic coast, south winds at 30 knots. Central coast, south winds 15 knots. And west winds at 15 knots for the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline. For tonight, we've got some freezing rain moving in along with the snow into the Yukon Delta and possibly up into Norton Sound with areas of snow pushing eastward across eastern Norton Sound, the Norton Bay, and the Nulato Hills. Snow and blowing snow for the northwest coast, western Brooks Range. Otherwise dry for the central and eastern interior with gusty winds across the Brooks Range of the eastern Arctic coast. Strong winds continue with cold conditions for the Panhandle, especially in the north, but it'll be windy all the way down to Dixon Entrance. And for tomorrow, cold front brings snow eastward across much of interior Alaska, heaviest west and north of the Alaska Range, but increasing snow chances throughout the afternoon for south central Alaska, maybe some snow showers for Kodiak Island. Less wind, diminishing wind, and still dry and cold for the Panhandle, and then the winds pick up, especially in the northern southeast coast. Chance of snow in the southern Panhandle, and snow and blowing snow again up in the Northwest Territory areas.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.